Hey everybody, Deathblade here. My YouTube channel is actually on a bit of a hiatus now because of the fact that I'm moving from China back to the United States. But I'm doing this special extra video to talk about that move. I've been here for 8 straight years. I've studied Chinese for a few years longer than that, more than 10 years I guess. And the time has come to move back. I remember back when I was first getting interested in China and Chinese culture, heavily interested. I used to follow a lot of blogs and websites. I don't even know if there were YouTubers in China at that time. Anyway, I used to follow blogs and websites, and occasionally, news would filter down of some longtime expat leaving China. And it always sort of confused me. I always thought, man, if I ever lived in China, that would be so cool and adventurous and interesting. I definitely would never leave. And here I am, after having lived expat life for 8 years. I never really left China. I went on vacations, a few weeks here, a few weeks there, but I have been here in China for 8 years, and now I'm leaving, so why? I'm gonna get into that in this video. For any of you who don't know me, my name is Jeremy. I make a living translating Chinese web novels under the online name Deathblade at wushuworld.com. I've translated a lot of Chinese characters. Translators oftentimes categorize projects by how many Chinese characters would be involved. Up to this point, I have translated something along the lines of 7 million Chinese characters or more. So that's a lot of Chinese characters. It's not exactly, high literature or something, but it's definitely a lot. And so that gives me kind of a unique insight, I think, into China and Chinese culture. So anyway, let's get right down to it and talk about why I'm moving. I have thought about making this video for a long time because in the process of planning a move like this with a family, which I have, is definitely not something that happens overnight. And so I've been thinking for a long time about what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. And what I've decided to do is, and after analyzing and thinking about the matter a lot, I basically categorized the reasons for moving into two separate categories. One category are the actual reasons why I am moving. And the other category are not necessarily reasons, they're more like supporting reasons. So additional factors that played into the decision that weren't necessarily the motivating factors. So I'm going to start with the actual motivating factors, the real reasons why I'm moving. And I've really identified basically two main reasons why I am actually moving back. The first one has to do with my work. So as I mentioned, I do translating. That is work that can be done anywhere, literally anywhere in the world. And that is one of the big reasons why I'm moving back. Many foreigners come here and they become very successful in China, but a lot of times the work that they do ends up being tied to China itself, whether that's educational work or business work. It's really hard to play into that China aspect of it when you're outside of China. But for me, all I need is an internet connection and a computer, and I can work literally anywhere. And so that's actually one of the big reasons why I'm moving back. But there's an even bigger reason, and that bigger reason is my son. So for any of you who don't know, I have a son who some of my readers on the web novel translation side affectionately call Baby Deathblade. He's actually over 3 years old now, which is kind of hard to believe. Time really does fly by. But he is one of the big reasons why my wife and I made the decision to leave China and go back to the United States. In terms of specifically, I would say there's kind of like two main reasons connected to him regarding why we're moving. The first one is about education. So he is now 3. He's definitely heading toward the age where we're going to be sending him to preschool and kindergarten, first grade, second grade. He's going to be entering the school system. And long story short, neither my wife nor I, and incidentally my wife is Chinese, she's born and raised here in China. Neither of us want him to be educated and brought up within the Chinese education system. And that's a subject that I could probably do a whole video on. To categorize it into a few bullet points, let me just say that for a long time in China, I taught English. I did it at virtually all levels. I taught everything from kids who weren't attending Chinese preschool all the way to university level, and even beyond that to adults who had already graduated from university and were in the workforce, and everything in between. The majority of my work was with kids ages roughly 3 to 12 or so. But I did teach at high schools and universities, middle schools, elementary schools, and the Chinese preschools in addition to that, like I did that as part-time work, so I've seen it all. And I've talked to a lot of people in China about this subject, from the children to the teachers, to the parents of the children who are going to school. And long story short, I'm not a huge fan of the Chinese education system. Thing is, I'm pretty sure if you talked to most Chinese young people, I think they would echo that sentiment. Chinese kids, for the most part, hate going to school. Now, I know that it's not like, all kids in America like love school or something. Like, kids don't generally want to go to school, but most Chinese kids hate school with a passion. Now, I know this because I've talked to a lot of Chinese kids about it. Over the years of working at that training school with kids between 3 and 12, I did have a lot of students who were either in preschool or were in grade school within China. And I always loved to talk to them about this subject. I obviously do speak Chinese, and so I would talk to these children in Chinese or in English, depending on their level. And inevitably, at one point in the class, I would ask them, do you like school? Do you like your teachers? Trust me. There was actually one young girl who really did like school that I remember, but I don't remember any other among hundreds of students. So I would say the percentage of students in the Chinese school system who actually enjoy going to school are in the vast minority. And there's a reason why. The Chinese education system is a test-taking education system. It focuses highly and maybe even exclusively on taking tests. You have to take tests to get into schools as you go through your life as a Chinese student, from middle school to university. And because of that, most of the education focuses on helping kids to be able to prepare to take tests. There is virtually no emphasis on creativity, on constructive thinking. It's mostly listening to the teachers, copying homework pages, a huge amount of homework. It's just not really the kind of education I want my son to experience in his young life as he goes through the school system. There are definitely advantages to the Chinese school system, don't get me wrong, but it's just not. I would prefer for my son to take advantage of the American education system. And to be honest, a huge amount of Chinese parents are working really, really hard to try to send their kids overseas, whether it's for high school or university, because they recognize that fact. So another factor in terms of my son is the overall environment that he's getting raised in. And I'm not talking about the pollution. I'll get to that in a second. What I'm mostly talking about is the behavior of a lot of the people around him. And I'm primarily talking about children. Again, this is a subject for another video, but because of the way Chinese culture works, there are a lot more undisciplined, rowdy, poorly behaved children in China than there are in Western countries. If you're going to distill it down into a very quick explanation of why, I think it's because in most households the parents are working and the young children are raised by the grandparents. Sometimes 2, sometimes 4 grandparents all raising one kid, maybe 2. And grandparents spoil the grandchildren. That's, I think, kind of part of the job of being a grandparent. That effect is amplified when you have these grandparents just completely raising the kids for the first few years. It's a prevailing attitude in China that the children should be allowed to do whatever they want until they get into school. They expect the teachers to whip the students into shape, which is one reason why the kids hate going to school, by the way. But in any case, what happens is you have a lot of kids who are just allowed to kind of do whatever they want for the first few years. And because of that, and trust me, I worked at a school where I saw hundreds of little kids all the time. There are a huge amount of kids who are just going crazy all the time. I really don't want my kid to be raised in that environment. In my opinion, it's kind of like, for the parents, it's like tossing the dice as to whether or not your kid is going to turn out to be sort of like a well-behaved young adult later on, because the things they learn at a very young age go with them through life. And so again, I don't want my kid being raised in that environment. There are other things about the environment, and again, I'm talking about the social environment, that are just things I hope that my kid could not be influenced by. For example, and if you get squeamish, you might want to skip this part, but it is not uncommon in China for people to relieve themselves on the street, especially kids. Just like, parents don't even care. If you don't know, Chinese kids, most of them don't wear diapers ever. Well, okay, I shouldn't say ever, but for the most of the day, they don't wear diapers. They have their pants are split open so the parents can easily allow them to relieve themselves anywhere. And so it's really common to see kids peeing and pooping just randomly everywhere. I really would like to avoid my kid having to grow up in that environment and be influenced by that. Okay, so those are actually the main two reasons why I am moving. I've had people on social media and on the Wushu World website leaving comments and asking me questions. Is it because of this or is it because of that? And they cite like political or social things that are hot topics in the news in the West. Not really. That has nothing to do with it. It's more practical reasons. Those things that tend to trend in the news in the West are things that most of the time don't affect me personally, and I think don't affect most foreigners. I honestly really feel that. So let's get into some of the other supporting reasons, and these are in no particular order. I just wrote down a few that are kind of the big ones. One of them is the fact that no matter how long you've lived in China as a foreigner, you always feel like an outsider and you never feel like you're at home. I did a big video about this in the series that I have called Yin Yang China, where I talk about the ups and the downs of living in China. And frankly, the whole like being an outsider, being different and being stared at is something that I've become used to for the most part. I don't want my kid to be growing up in that environment. Sad thing is, if you look different in China, you are always going to be stared at and pointed at and looked at and talked about. And again, it's annoying and frustrating to me, and I think to most foreigners who live here for a while. It's especially challenging for young ones. And my son is turning out to be a little bit more like me when I was younger. He's a little bit more shy. He doesn't like people staring at him. He doesn't like people pointing and talking about him. And so therefore, that's a factor. I'm kind of done with it. Again, it's not one of the reasons why I'm leaving, but it definitely makes it a lot easier to leave and to go back to a place where when you walk down the street, nobody cares about you. You have, like I mentioned, my wife's Chinese. I'm obviously typical American. Our son is mixed. I think in America, most people just looking at him wouldn't be able to tell that. In China, everybody can tell from like a mile away. So here, we're the center of attention wherever we go constantly. In America, it's like literally nobody cares. And that's actually a nice feeling after a while. Another thing that plays into the decision is the pollution. Where I live in North China is one of the most polluted parts of China. It's really bad. There are days when the air quality is just literally hazardous. So, we can stay inside. We have air purifiers. And on a day-to-day basis, I feel like it's not a massive, huge problem. The pollution has gotten a lot better in the city that I live in over the past couple of years. There are many more days with clear skies and little pollution, but still it's nothing close to my hometown in California where, you can check the pollution levels between the two cities and it's like the pollution over there is virtually non-existent compared to here. So that's definitely a factor. There are other places in China that have less pollution. And I think that's a good point to mention another issue, which is there are places in China that where some of these issues that I'm talking about are different or don't exist. For example, if you go to the tier 1 cities, which I don't live in a tier 1 city, I live in a tier 2, a kind of a smaller, less developed city. If you go to the tier 1 cities where foreigners are more common, some of the issues I mentioned before and some of the issues I'm going to mention after this are different. But the thing is, my family doesn't really know anybody in any other city in China. I mean, we know people, but we don't have close friends and family in any other major city in China. And if we're going to make this big move and go to somewhere where it's more expensive to live, we would rather just go back to my hometown where I have, people that I know than go to some other random place in China and try to start all over. It just doesn't seem to make much sense. So going down the list of other things that are contributing factors, one of them is the internet situation. So as I'm sure many of you know, China controls the internet and it makes it difficult to go to commonly used websites in the Western world, such as Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google. And you can use VPNs to access those, especially for work purposes. But even with those VPNs, it's an extreme headache. They drop, they go out of service. They make the internet really, really slow. I've been trying to do YouTube videos for a while now, and one of the biggest headaches is having to deal with uploading through that firewall. Wushu World has a lot of its services routed through Google, which means that you have to use the VPN to use a lot of the services to do my translation work. And I seriously can't count how many times I've like uploaded a chapter or an announcement or something, and then all of a sudden there's an error, and then the VPN drops, and then I'm sitting there for 2 or 3 minutes until it finally gets back up and gets going again. And in addition to the frustration, it is a big waste of time. I mean, if I counted up how many of those minutes per day I sit there waiting for the VPN to connect back, and I'm just sitting there doing nothing, not accomplishing anything. If I added all that time up, I'm kind of scared to know how much time has been wasted because of that. So I am looking forward to being back in a place where I can focus on things like, making videos, translating, and not have to worry about whether I'll even be able to upload that video after I make it. A fourth among these supporting factors is the food. Now, I did a whole video about this recently about Chinese food. I love Chinese food. I'm even one of the original contributors to a new website called Hot Pot Ambassador, where we talk about all the amazing stuff that has to do with hot pot. I'm a huge hot pot fan, and I like all different other types of Chinese food. Trust me, I really do love it. However, there is a very little variety in China. There is very little Western food, very little foreign food. It's few and far between. It's oftentimes not authentic. And for the first few years of living here, I was just so in love with, even up to maybe having lived here for 5 years, I wasn't even worried about missing Western food. I would often make my own stuff at home. But as the years have gone by, I just really do miss being able to walk out and get like a taco. So I'm from Southern California. I love Mexican food. But where I live, it's not just Mexican food. There are virtually all types of cuisines that you can get at the drop of a hat. I really do miss that, and I have really started to get tired of the same type of Chinese food over and over again. If you want more information on that, you can go check out my video where I talk about that in more detail. A fifth and final thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of the supporting reasons is the medical system in China. It is, frankly, it's too big of a topic to get into right now. But having a young 3-year-old who sometimes gets sick and sometimes has problems, and of course just as a family we generally have problems, that's something of big concern to me. One of the problems with Chinese medical system is it's so tied into traditional Chinese medicine, and this is not to knock on traditional Chinese medicine, but the problem is that the doctors cater to that, in my opinion, way too much. I was really, really angry only a few months ago because my son was having some pretty severe constipation problems, and so we went to the local children's hospital, which is supposedly really good. My wife got the name of who was supposed to be the most experienced doctor there. We waited for an hour and a half, and then this is what the doctor said. I'm not joking. After asking just a couple questions, he said, "Oh, well, it's summer now, so you probably have the air conditioner on, but if the cold air from the air conditioner touches his skin, then it can cause these problems. So take this medicine and then, come back if there's any more problems." It was the same medicine that another doctor had prescribed him only a few months before when he was throwing up. Just a random traditional Chinese medicine for digestive problems. And I was so angry about that. I happen to have a fan who supports me on Patreon who is a pediatrician from the United States. So I got home, and it's hard for a doctor to provide any sort of advice being on the other side of the world, but I sent an email with some detailed information, and she responded and said, it's impossible to say for sure, but when she has clients who have problems similar to this, one of the first things she suggests that they look into is problems with lactose. And she, said what she thought was a good limit for the amount of milk a child should drink in a day, and we were exceeding that by like triple. So guess what? We cut back on milk, the problems all went away. And I'm thinking, how could we go to the best hospital in town and be told that the air conditioner shouldn't blow on him and take a random medicine and then we're gone? And anyway, so sorry, I'm kind of ranting about that. But the medical stuff is definitely something that I think is a problem, and I shudder to think what would happen if there was a serious problem and then I had to go into the Chinese medicine system. I'm not sure if you can see on the video, I have a pretty nasty scar here. I severed these tendons in my forearm, and I had it all handled, the surgery and the hospitalization through the Chinese medical system, and there just was so much stuff about it that was disheartening to me. So this is my video. I probably talked for a little bit longer than I meant to, and yet I didn't even touch on all of the different random factors that play into it. In the end, it kind of comes down to this. For many, many years, I had no intention of moving back, at least in the short term. I envisioned being in China for a really long time. Even after my wife got pregnant and our son was born, neither she nor I really had any intention of moving back anytime soon. To the point where even when my son was a year and a half, something like that, I was still working hard at trying to come up with a solution to the education problem. I was thinking of trying to start an international school in the city that I live in. I was really focused on that. And then when my son was about, I guess, a year and a half, we took a trip. We went back to the United States and stayed there for a little over a month. And it wasn't very influential to me personally. It was kind of exactly what I remembered it as being. But for my wife, it was a different thing. She had never been out of China. It was her first time in the United States. And it was her first time experiencing a lot of the things that I had talked about to her and I've mentioned in this video, for example, not being stared at constantly. So we experienced that and came back. And, you know, after, I'm not sure how long it was, maybe a couple weeks or a month or two or something, she came home one day and she was like, let's move to the United States. And I was a little taken aback because even then I hadn't really put that on my radar in terms of like a goal to move toward. And the thing was, after being there and then coming back, those issues of the pollution and education, because even though my son is not old enough for preschool yet, he still goes to some of those, you would call them like training schools or whatever, like gym class and swimming class. Issues of the pollution, the food, the VPN stuff, the medical stuff, all that stuff kind of hit home to her even more. And I think it was maybe one day when they had been stared at and talked about in the elevator multiple times or something, I forget. She just kind of was like, I'm done with this. Let's just go to the United States. And I was like, all right, fair enough. Let's do that. And so here we are. I'm actually moving. That we have our plane tickets in only a couple days. We'll be flying back to the United States. And we'll definitely be coming back to visit. Who knows? Maybe, things will change in the coming years and we'll end up moving back to China. That's always a possibility. But for the time being, we're going to be in the United States. I have a whole series of videos that I've been working on called Yin Yang China, where I talk about the ups and downs of expat life. And I had really wanted to get that series done while I was in China. It just didn't work out. But after I get to the United States and get settled, I'm going to continue pumping out some of those videos because I have more topics to talk about. And I also do have a series of videos on my YouTube channel where I talk about Chinese fantasy novels and web novels and explaining and analyzing some of the different things about them that are hard for Western viewers to understand. And so I'm going to get back to all of that stuff after I move and get settled. And so this will probably be the last video I do on YouTube for a while. But look for more content within the next, hopefully, couple months. I hope that I can get there, get settled down, and get things going again within about a month or two. But you never know what'll happen in life. Maybe it'll be longer than that. Thanks for everybody who has subscribed to the channel and liked the videos, and thanks to those who have supported me on Patreon. My Patreon is currently on hold because I'm not producing any content, but I hope to get it back going after I start doing videos again. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram, and if you haven't checked out the translations of Chinese web novels, definitely go to Wuxia World and check them out. They're very, very cool. That's it for now, so I'll see you in the next video whenever that is. 告辞了。